Getchimigwach, Bishop, Ginanas Committee, Ginanas Committee on Miswegata Sheikh and Demok. Brothers and sisters in Christ, it is a real privilege, a real honor to be in your midst at this synod, the 135th session of your synod. But a year ago or so, I had the privilege of attending the Sacred Circle at Perth. And it was at that Sacred Circle that I got to meet more and more people of clergy, my own people, lay people, people who are devoted and have committed their lives to the church. And it was there that I met quite a number of bishops, and I think it was there that I met John. And in the course of time, I'm not sure where it was. I believe it may have been at one of the meetings of the Council of General Synod, or maybe one of the committee meetings. I can't say for sure, but I do know this, that he had asked me to come and be the keynote speaker here at your synod. When he asked me to do this, I was deeply humbled. And I asked, why me? I didn't ask him that, but that thought rushed across my mind, flashed across my mind, and I said, why me? And why is this guy asking a year ahead in advance? I don't plan 2 weeks in advance. I don't even know what my sermon's going to be next week. And here we have this man that asks me to come and speak at this synod a little over a year ago. And I was deeply humbled. I was actually not necessarily humbled. The real question that came to my mind is why? Why? And even more so when I looked at and found out the keynote speakers of the past, I said to myself, goodness, why me? And because I say that because as I look at you, most of you are clergy out there and so on, and archdeacons and all the rest of it, and have had many years in ministry. Many years in ministry. My years in ministry as a priest has only been 2 years. 2 years. With less than a year being a deacon. So I said to myself, why me? And as I went on in time to find out what kind of a synod this was going to be, when I got the email from Reverend Gregoire on the liturgy, he asked me for comments, and again I was amazed at the liturgy that was planned for this, and I said to myself, man, these people know what they're doing. They really know what they're doing, and I think they know what they want. And I reflect back on that whole question of why me? And now I understand. So I say thank you very much to Bishop John for having me here. And I say thank you to all of you for giving me time to speak to you this morning. And I want to acknowledge, first of all, the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, the land in which we stand here. The theme for this session is walking in your way to justice and wholeness. And as I looked at that theme, I said to myself, that's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of stuff. And being asked to speak this morning and tomorrow again, this morning I have chosen to speak on the first half of that theme, and that is the whole notion of walking, journeying. And tomorrow I will spend some time speaking on this notion of justice and wholeness. So that's my approach that I'm going to be using as I share with you my thoughts and my experiences. When I was the Dean of Aboriginal Studies at Cambridge College a number of years ago, I had the privilege in my first year, before the fall term started, of going to a leadership seminar of all the deans and the vice presidents and so on and so forth at a resort just outside of Sudbury. And the guest speaker at that time was Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey, most of you will know, is a renowned author who wrote a number of books, one of them being The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. It was a wonderful experience being able to listen and interact with Stephen Covey for that short time, an experience I will never forget. And one of the things that I've learned from Stephen Covey was this statement that he has in one of his books that says, "Seek first to understand. Seek first to understand, then to be understood." That seek first to understand and then to be understood stuck with me. And I've often pondered these thoughts in my hearts and my minds when I'm mowing my grass, when I'm driving on a snow machine going out to my camp. It takes me an hour to get there and back in the tundra of James Bay that people like Jim will know, because I took Jim out there, and Richard and Bev and others from St. Matthew's. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. I've often thought of this for myself and also for others. People like yourselves, people like my children, my people. Now that I was speaking with a number of my peers that I grew up with. One of them, of course, being in a hospital. When I made a hospital visit, he had suffered a very, very painful experience with a pinched nerve in his back, and he was about my age. And he was lamenting with me his experience and how he's looking at life ahead. And when we talked about that, and I said to him, you know, we have to acknowledge that as we look back, as we look at our life now, especially myself, I look that I am on the backside of my life right now. I am on the other half of my life. I'm not young anymore. I'm not young anymore. And I really begin to think about these things in deeper ways. And one of the things I've often asked myself, the two age-old questions. Who am I? Where do I come from? And I have spent many years with those questions. I remember my mother in her old age, after she had lost her second leg to diabetes in her wheelchair. I asked her a question, and I asked her, "Nagai, Yananiwana," and literally translated means, "Mother, am I a person?" Or in other words, "Mother, am I a Cree person?" And my mother looked at me in her late 70s, early 80s, I believe it was, and she was not happy with the question that I had posed to her, because it was asked only to answer that question of who am I and where do I come from. And her answer was very poignant. And she said to me, "No, chimekidochin." She said, "You are from the land." That's all she told me. You are from the land. So I share that as I start with you. And I say, to enable to walk in your way, so to enable you to walk in your way, I share with you this morning my inward journey of who I am as I understand it. I am a descendant of Patrick Stephen, who signed the treaty in 1905, in August of 1905, in Albany. I am a descendant of Patrick Stephen, his wife Emily Sutherland. I am the descendant of Simeon, Wesley, and Gitche Lizzie, the great Lizzie Friday, from Agamaskie Island, off Ottawa-Pascat. I am a descendant of those. I am schooled by my parents, my mom and dad. I remember distinctly my father telling me as a young boy, about 10, 11 years old, and he said to me in a very certain way, he said, "When you grow up, you are going to need a boat. G-man can do it in, can do it in, gabba just dying. You will need a boat." And I often wondered that question as I grew up of what he meant by that. And I said, that's fairly simple. We do live on an island. So we're going to need a boat to get off the island. But I thought there was a deeper meaning to it than that. See, my father taught us how to hunt. He was a great hunter like people of his generation were. He was a great hunter, and he taught me very early. He took me out at the tender age of 9 years old with a 12-gauge shotgun for me to use to start hunting geese when I was 9 years old. A semi-automatic Sportsman 58 Remington. 9 years old. He taught me how to hunt. You're going to need a boat. You're going to need a boat. But as I grew up, I understood what my father said. You're going to need a boat. You're going to need a life. You're going to need a life, is what he told me. And that boat transcends into a life. And what you put into your boat, what you put into your life, is the essence of what your being is. This is the teaching that I have from my father. Primacy for him, to us, was to be educated. He said, you're going to need a boat. You need to be educated about life. So he taught me the best he could about life as he experienced it. And he said to us as well that you need to go to school. You need to go to school. And that is something that my father and my mother instilled in us very deeply. I was schooled in Moose Factory Indian Day School in Moose Factory. I was schooled in Moose Factory Island Public School in Moose Factory. And because there was no high school in Moose Factory at the time, we had to go south at the tender age of just turning 12, or just between 12 and 13, to go to high school in North Bay. Never really experienced an indoor flush toilet, never mind showers or bathtubs for that matter. We had to go to school down there. And our parents insisted that we do that. All because my father told me that you're going to need a boat, and you're going to need to fill it. Over time, my career, I've had these aspirations of things that I wanted to do, and the first was, of course, being a pilot. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to live the life of one of our heroes from our area are by the name of Lindy Ludit, who is one of the great pilots, bush pilots we had, one of our own, and I wanted to be like him. But as soon as I got into a plane to go to Timmins one time, that was dashed because I said to myself, I'm afraid to get into a plane. So much for that. And I worked at different jobs. And one of the jobs that I did, I was reminded of was I walked into Moose Factory, Winnebago Hospital, which used to be called the TB hospital that was built in Moose Factory back in the 1950s. It was a 3-story building. And in them 3 stories, there were 4 stairwells. And I had a summer job. And my job, of course, at that time when I was a high school student, was to wax and polish and sweep the floors and so on. And one of the jobs that I dreaded was sweeping those 4 stairwells that are 3 stories high. Swear to God, they're as high as a CN Tower. 60 years ago. That was 60 years ago. When I was visiting the people at the hospital, I was reminded this summer, I said, my God, 60 years ago, I dreaded the thought of sweeping these floors. I've come a long ways. And in between that, I have been an apprentice mechanic. I've been married. I labored at building houses. I worked at the band office as a young band administrator at a tender age of 19. I was a counselor, counseling high school students going south like I did from my community. And I became a teacher, and I pursued my degree as a teacher. I've entered politics. I became chief. I became a grand chief, or then called tribal chairman. I've been a special advisor to the grand chief, and went back into education, did education administration stuff, director of education for a First Nation. I was the dean of Aboriginal Studies at Cambridge College, and a whole mess of stuff. And my swan song was going to the De Beers Victor mine not too long ago, because it was 2 weeks in, 2 weeks out. I thought it was a great half-time job. I spent 3 years there at the Victor Mine. Wonderful 3 years. Very, very steep learning experience. And then my highest calling at Pinawa in Manitoba at Sacred Circle. I saw at Sacred Circle as many as you are here, perhaps more of my own people, wearing the collar. I was a lay reader. I've been a lay reader now. If there's anything constant in my life, is that I have been a lay reader for quite a number of years, a good 30 years perhaps. And I had that calling when I saw my own people in their priesthood. And God called me. God called me, and I said, I am ready. That was 6 years ago. And here I stand now in my last calling, and I have found these last 6 years to be probably the most challenging of all the things that I have done throughout my life, but also the most fulfilling in doing God's work as He calls us. All the while, the old age question lingers, calling and calling. Norm, who are you? Where do you come from? My response to that call has been one of the greatest journeys in my life. And in 1985, it kind of culminated into a paper that I wrote called In Search of Cree Reality. In Search of Cree Reality. You see, as we were going through our high school days and post-high school days, we had that search, as most people do, from what I understand, in terms of asking, who am I and where am I going? A lot of my peers went out west to spend time with the elders of Alberta and the foothills of the Rockies and so on, to learn about who they were as Aboriginal people. I chose not to do that. I chose to spend time sitting with my elders and listening to their stories. And in listening to their stories, I found such a deep wealth, a new understanding of who I am because of who they were. At the beginning of last night's Thanksgiving over water, these words were spoken. When Anglicans arrived on this land, now known as North America, they bought their Bibles and their faith. What did they find? They found the hearts and minds and spirits of our people. The reality that I'm about to speak of, that reality. In one of my searches, I found this story about two men who walked in an open plain up in another world in search of this wonderful place that they could see down below in the break of the sky that they walked on. The lush green, the waters, the birds, and the animals. And they longed to be down there, and they would say, we want this place because it is so wonderful. And in time, as they walked, they could see the speck in the distance. And as they got closer and closer to it, they could see it was the spirit of Ehip. And as they approached it, Ehip turned and he says, he said, what is it that you want? And they said, we want to go down to this world. We want to go down to this world, the lushness, the waters, the clean air, the animals, the beauty and the wonder of that land. And Ehip said, I can help you. And Ehip spun with his web, this bowl, and he told the two to climb in. And indeed they did. And he said, I'm going to lower you to this world. I'm going to lower you to this world, and you are not to look down over the edge until you have reached. So they went down, down, down to this world below. And one's curiosity got the better and peered over the side, and the bowl started to swing violently. And it went back down, going down, down, and came to a rest. And the line detached. They peered over the edge, and they could see that they were perched on a tall, tall tree with no branches, no way for them to be able to shimmy down. And they could see the greenery, the waters, the animals, the birds on the ground, not yet at their destination. And they asked the animals, hey, adik, we jinan, caribou, help us. And the caribou looked up and he said, we can't help you. We're not able to climb trees. We have a hard enough time walking on rocky ground. Other animals came by the same. And it wasn't until the fisher, Jake, came by and he went up, scampered up the tree and brought one down, then the other. Then they were able to set their feet on the ground. And they were coupled with the bear, who taught them about this wonderful creation that they had set foot on. And as I tell the story, when they got down to that land, they said that they paid homage to the Creator for this vast land and learned to become part of it, caring for all living things that provided for them. And as I recount this story, I am reminded of that which is in the Bible that says, God saw all that he made. It was very good. There was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. the origin of where we come from as a people. Told in mythology and our legends of our people. And mythology, legends carry a connotation of things being just fairy tales in today's society, unfortunately. But mythology in its true sense by Marcia Eliade, a leading interpreter of religious experience, says, mythology narrates a sacred history to be understood as a religious phenomenon that cannot be fully or cannot be at all be explained in non-religious categories. They're stories that don't seem to make sense to the world that we understand right now. That is to say that myths are ahistorical, they're not scientific, concerned with only to express the inexpressible. Myths are accounts of significant events that tell a primordial time, the very beginning. The very beginning. Genesis. This is our Genesis. This is our Genesis. And from that, we begin to understand that we say this whole notion of the Bering Strait theory and all the rest of them are washed by what our people believed, where we came from. And from that, we begin to develop a relationship of this land that we know is Nitaskimanan. And we begin to pay homage to that in various ways. And one of the ways that we paid homage to that was to go on vision quests. And John Honigman would say, boys and girls. John Honigman was an anthropologist who went to Attawapiskat, and he would say, boys and girls made a deliberate attempt to secure helpers by dreaming. They would go into these small huts outside of their camp with only water to dream, to be in communion with the spirit world, and to be told their purpose in their life. And old Kioki that spoke with John Honigman at the time says, the important point was to live there without fire and eat only lightly. Just the same church, Kioki explained. Just the same church. He was able to relate this whole business of vision quest to what we do in church in our attempts to be in communion with our Creator and the spirit world. And with that, I'm reminded of Matthew 4 that we all know so well, that said, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to find his calling, to find his calling. So we have this time with beginning and, of course, time with an end. It is expressed in two different categories by our people. One is called Atulachewan in my dialect, in a dialect perhaps of Margaret and others, Atiochewan. Time when the world was created, time when significant events took place, time that determined the course of what this world would look like, known as sacred time, Atulachewan, mythological time. That's our understanding. And then, of course, somewhere after that, there is this break, or for some reason that I don't know about, but the time after that is called Debajimun, time of historical time, where we can go back in life and tell stories of what happened in the world that we now understand. Debajimun. And that time is no longer sacred time, because we have taken the sacredness of the time that was given to us, and we have broken We have departed. We have betrayed the trust of what that time was meant to be in this world that we live in. Eliade, one of my mentors that I keep reading about, calls it profane time. We live now in profane time, where we have broken the course of the sacredness of the time at the very beginning. And we tell stories of that time. And in order to try to get back to that sacredness of time, our people led what they called this religious life. And one of the ways they did that was by vision quest, going back and trying to be in communion or trying to be directed by a great spirit, a higher order, a higher power. Religious life, they began to understand that there is something greater, much more than they who are here on this earth, by looking at the mythology, the stories of the past. My friend Robert Tubles, who is Oglala Sioux, says, we call him Wakantanka. And Wakantanka is great mystery. We don't understand. We don't understand this being that's created us. It's only by faith that we believe. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar? Religious life, of course, becomes then a commemoration, a remembering, a remembering. The memory reactualized by rites plays a decisive role in our people. Before the first mast was seen on James Bay, before the first mast that was seen, when the first Anglicans came over, this was our essence of who we were. A commemoration last night we did the Eucharist. And one of the things that we do as clergy that celebrate Eucharist in our Eucharistic prayer, we say, do this in remembrance of me. Do this in remembrance of me. I am not a learned person, my brothers and sisters in Christ, but I have found this word, I believe it's Hebrew, that says, and I'm not even sure I can pronounce this properly, anamnesis. Anamnesis. A memorial sacrifice. That was the word I understand that was used in the translation of what Jesus did when he said, do this in remembrance of me. To remember who you are. Christian, do you know who you are? Look to Christ. Norm, do you know who you are? Look to your very beginnings of where you come from. The Creator that created you, the one that put you here on this earth. Anamnesis, a memorial sacrifice. We have two concepts of one being God, our Creator, Manitou. When the first settlers came into our area, I believe it was one of my father's stepfather, Frank Rickard. He tells the anthropologist, before you came, there was only Manitou. And now we have Gitche Manitou, the great Manitou that you talk about. Meaning to say that ours is not as great as yours. We did have a Manitou. We didn't call him Gitche Manitou because it was a given. It was a given. Then, of course, we had the Cree understanding of who we are, the Gitche Manitou. And from that, we have these rites that we have, known as ceremonies, most of which have disappeared or gone into the distant fog of life, I will call it. But in those times, there was the reactualization of rights. And here we have a statement that I wanted to share with you that says, since good sprang from the heart, and since man and woman were engaged in conferring good upon their brothers and sisters, their celebration of the gift was known as Medewin. Medewin. The term is probably contracted from the word minno, which is good, dehewin, which is hearted. Medewin, being good-hearted. And from there we have this religious life of people who have discovered that they have special gifts. Our people, they were called Medeos, shamans. Shamans, who were able to transform and be in direct communion with the spirit world at will. At will. And they would perform this shaking tent ceremony. And Regina Flannery from the Catholic University of America in her work in late 1930s experiences the shaking tent ritual. And she says, it is inexpressible. It is difficult to understand what we saw. A man, a shaman, in a tent being in communion with the spirit world. Not only that, speaking with Powagans, the guardian spirits, all the while this tent shaking. And my husband, who is a budding anthropologist, completely bewildered because he was a budding physicist who helped build the shaking tent and could not understand how the shaman was able to speak in communion with his Powagans, played a drum, and this tent shaking the way it is. This is the power of our people, known as the shamans. This is what was met as the boats landed time after time into James and Hudson's Bay of our people. People like Gusei Joseph, who was one of the greatest shamans that we know, that I am told. He was told that he had this ability to, he was so huge in his spiritual form that his feet were not, this world was not big enough for his feet to stand on this earth as we know it. His head was not able to, he was not able to stand upright in this world that we know because of how tall he was in his spiritual strength. He wasn't able to do that. And he would say that, I have seen the great thunder, not the ones that we hear, with the flashes of lightning of the storms that we experience in this human world. These are not the ones. Onimiskoak, the thunder beings. I know the thunder people. I know of them. And I know of the one that holds the two sticks. And when they are struck with one another, is the source of all power. This was the words of Gusei Joseph, one of the most powerful shamans that we've known in our tribe. And he would say that I swam across this wide body of water in his transformation. And he said, and I had seen a people, and if I had stepped on that land, we would have not seen these people that we now know as the settlers that came. Gusei Joseph, Geshe Medat, another one, the great Medat, another shaman. Two examples. There is this shovel that we know, there's this instrument that we have as a shovel, and it's a carved piece of wood that looks like a shovel. It's used to shovel snow away, and it's a very useful tool. And it's about this wide, about that long, and it's made into a shovel, finely crafted. And they would say that St. Joseph would travel, riding his Maganahegan, riding his shovel off the ground about this high. The power of these people was amazing. And I hear these stories from our people, and I say to myself, it doesn't make sense, doesn't it? It doesn't make sense, but neither does it make sense for Moses to draw water out of a stone, or to see a fire that's not consumed. None of this. To bring people back to life who have died, the Lazaruses, the little children, that Jesus did. When Geshemet went into that wigwam and brought that young girl back to life, using the powers of these reactualized rights that we have. These are the people. This is who I am. This is where I come from. This is my understanding. Seek first to be understood. Then seek first to understand. Then I can tell you who I am. And my prayer, that I will be understood. Why I do this. Why I stand with a passion in my heart for Christ. Why I stand with a passion in my heart for who I am. My journey with the elders has been a time when I sat where all time and all space have stood still. Time. There was no sense of time when I sat with these elders. There was no space. It was just a moment that sinks deep into my heart, deep into my heart. And I wrote a story called, and I collected these stories called The Droppings of Rabbits in the Bark of Trees. And I will share that story with you perhaps at dinner. But in the introduction of this paper, this collection of stories that I have, I wrote these words. Today we stand at the threshold of an epoch where the last of a generation are passing before our very eyes, enduring and witnessing a time of age-old truths, imposed transgressions. The statement of our elders is aired with reverence, with humility, with laughter and sorrow and uncertainty. A sense of imbalance prevails over their thoughts and the thoughts of the generations to follow. Me, my children, my grandchildren. The countless hours I have spent listening to the words of the older generation diminishes in time with the passing of each from this earthly life. Thus again, I am reawakened to the realization that the doorway to my reality closes that much more. And I pray, teach me to listen. I am grateful to be fated in the presence of age where I can hear the voices of my fathers, my forefathers, in the native tongue. These songs of the past have shifted up every possible human emotion within me. And these are the stories of old. These are who we are. This is my reality. This is who I am. This has been my journey that I share with you this morning. I want to end by saying that in the opening sentence, I believe, of last Sunday, and correct me if I'm wrong later, this is my story, and I'm prayerful that my story will be reflective of the last part of that opening sentence that we had. I believe it was last Sunday, where it talks about the Word of God being alive and active. Remember that? The Word of God being alive and active. And the last part of that, saying that those words will sift thoughts, will sift intentions of the hearts. So I am prayerful that though my words are not spoken by God, these are my words, and I'm prayerful that they will sift your thoughts in your journey, and they will sift the intentions of your heart into the future. Your journey, your walk. When we look at how we walk. And tomorrow, I will spend some time in talking about how it is that we have walked together. From the time that we first saw the first sailboat come in, we refer to the English people as being whamistigoshuak. And we have two terms, whamistigoshuak. And whamistigoshuak means those people who come after the logs, the trees. When they landed, the first thing that they started looking for was trees to repair their masts, to build their forts. And they started cutting all these trees, these whamistigoshuak. And then when the missionary came, they were called Saganash. Anglicans, Saganash. They came in these boats, and it describes the masts as you would see in the distance. Before you would see the boat, you would see the mast on the horizon. Saganash. I will spend some time talking about that, the interaction, and perhaps some time talking about where we go into the future, and hopefully give you some intentions of your heart or where you want to walk in your journey. Get you miigwech, get an ask